This is part 2 of the Chapter 1 lectures. We left off with this slide here, and I wanted to make sure that you knew exactly what I was looking for whenever you're asked to list the levels of organization from simplest to the most complex. So we would start with the atom. That would be the simplest, and then combinations of atoms would be molecules. And this is probably not going to be in any of your questions, but technically the molecules would combine to form small structures inside the cell called organelles. And then all the organelles plus the plasma membrane would make up a cell, or the cells. Groups of cells form tissues. And looking at the levels of organization, we will have a chapter on chemistry, that would be your molecules. And then we'll have a chapter on cytology, which is the study of cells, and then a chapter on histology. So chemistry is chapter 2, cytology is chapter 3, and histology, or study of tissues, is chapter 4. And then groups of tissues that form a structure would be organs. And then organs combine to form organ systems. We've got 11 of those. And we'll study most of the organ systems. And all the organ systems together in the body make up the organism. And with the exception of single-celled organisms, this is how the organization works for all multicellular organisms. Now let's move on and talk about the 11 body systems, or organ systems, body systems. Either way is fine. But the body systems or organ systems start with the integumentary, which is the skin, and accessory structures. The skeletal system consists of your bones and tendons and ligaments attached to the bones. Muscular system is referring primarily to your skeletal muscle. And then nervous system, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive. So if we look here on the next few pages, we have pictures of the organ systems. For this chapter, you really just need to know a summary of each organ system. You need to know the major components. Like for the integumentary system, the primary component is the skin, but we also have the hair and the nails, and then we have glands like sweat glands and oil glands. But basically, if you'll learn these diagrams, these illustrations that you see on these next few slides of the organ systems, you should be okay. And the major function of each organ system. So the skin, of course, is for major function as protection, but it does help control body temperature. For example, when you're hot, you sweat, and when you're cold, your skin will form goosebumps, or you may have another name, but anyway, your skin will, the blood vessels in your skin will constrict to hold in heat. So, and also your skin provides sensory information. Then we have the skeletal system, which consists of the axial skeleton, which is the skull, and then the vertebrae and the ribs. And then the appendicular skeleton, appendages are structures that kind of extend out from the main body. So arms and legs, for example. So the appendicular skeleton consists of the bones of the arms and the legs, and it also consists of the bones that form your shoulder area and your hip area. So we call, that would be like the collarbone and the shoulder blades, and then your pelvic bones here. But we'll have a whole chapter where we learn the bones. The main thing is the bones of the skeleton. And what they do is provide support to the body, protection in the case of the skull, protecting the brain. Bones actually store minerals like calcium and even fat. Fat is stored in bone marrow. And bone marrow forms blood cells. So the skeletal system has more functions than what you would think. The muscular system, when we study the muscular system, we're going to be studying the skeletal muscles. So, of course, the main function is movement, but there's also protection, like here in the abdominal cavity. There are no bones that protect the abdominal organs, but there are muscles, like the abdominal muscles that lay over top of the abdominal organs, protecting them. And muscles produce heat when we move. So those are different functions of the muscular system. Then we have the nervous system, which consists of the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system are your nerves. And the nervous system controls other body systems by electrical impulses. We call those action potentials. So it's a control system, along with the endocrine system, which is a control system that acts mainly through hormones rather than electrical signals. So the nervous system controls the body with more fast-acting, shorter-acting signals that are electrical. And then the endocrine system controls the body with long-term changes through the action of hormones. So you can see the endocrine system may be one that you're not as familiar with. So we'll look at some of these structures. The pineal gland in the brain produces melatonin. You may have heard of that. That has a function in sleep and sleep-wake cycles. The pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the pancreas, which has many, many functions. We know it produces insulin to help regulate blood glucose levels, but it also produces digestive enzymes to help with digestion. Then we have the adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys that produce what we know commonly as adrenaline, but in medicine we call it epinephrine and norepinephrine, as well as the stress hormone cortisol. Then we have the ovaries in females and the testes in the male, which kind of overlaps with the reproductive system. The thymus and the parathyroid glands. So that's the endocrine system. The cardiovascular system is going to be your heart and your blood vessels. Sorry. The lymphatic system is going to be where we talk about immunity. But there are vessels in the lymphatic system. There are lymphatic vessels, just like in the cardiovascular system. They're just, instead of being blood vessels, they're lymphatic vessels, and they contain a fluid called lymph. And you've probably heard of your lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes concentrated in your armpit and your neck and your groin area. And they swell up when you're sick. So the lymphatic system has a function in controlling levels of body fluids, and also in infection and disease, defense against infection and disease. Then we have the respiratory system, which is your breathing, of course, and the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide with your tissues and your blood. So that's going to include your lungs and your airways. And then we have the digestive system, which is the digestive tract, which starts at the mouth and ends at the anus. And then we have accessory organs that help with digestion that aren't part of the GI tract or the digestive tract. The liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, which is kind of underneath the stomach. And of course, this is for digesting and processing food and absorbing the nutrients into our bloodstream, so that all the cells of our body can get the nutrients that they need, and the oxygen oxygen's from the respiratory system. The nutrients would be like glucose and amino acids and fatty acids and things like that. Then we have the urinary system, which is going to deal with the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. Helps to balance the water balance in the body, and it actually interacts hand in hand with the cardiovascular system. And then the reproductive system, of course, there'll be the male and the female, and the function of that is basically two. One is to reproduce, which is to create offspring, but the other is to produce the male and female characteristics and the male and female hormones and that kind of thing. So identify the organ systems. Just remember there's 11. Make sure you know them and their major functions. And then some of the major components of the organ system. So let's look at number 6. Which organ system includes the pituitary gland and directs long-term changes? Long-term changes. If you remember, through the action of hormones, and this would be the endocrine system. Okay, and then we're coming to our section on homeostasis. The definition of homeostasis is that is a state of internal balance or a stable environment. Let me get my pen here. So here's the definition: a state of internal balance or a stable internal environment. Oh, that's a beautiful line there. That homeostasis must be maintained in order to survive. When our body doesn't maintain homeostasis, we get sick. We get, we're in a condition where it could be life or death. There are many, many conditions that have to be maintained. And so what happens when homeostasis isn't, when we're not in a state of internal balance or stable internal environment, is that we have illness or disease. So homeostasis is maintained by all of these body systems functioning together. Regulation of homeostasis occurs by either a process called negative feedback or positive feedback, which we'll talk about in a minute. But when conditions get out of balance or homeostasis is not being maintained, we have mechanisms in place that help return those conditions back to a stable conditions. So regulation of homeostasis involves a receptor, something that senses the change, and the change is the stimulus. A control center, which many times the control center is the brain, and an effector, and that's going to be the cell or organ or gland that responds to the commands from the control center. Now, the response can either be opposite of the stimulus or it can enhance the stimulus. So an example of homeostasis outside the body is a thermostat in your house. Sorry about that. Okay, so in your house you have a thermostat and it's set at a desired room temperature. So let's say that room temperature is somewhere around 70 degrees, something like that. Some people like it cooler, some people like it hotter, but we'll just say 70 degrees Fahrenheit, of course. I'm sorry about that. That's supposed to be a 70. But anyway, what happens with the thermostat is that it receives or it detects the changes in the temperature. So during the day, especially this time of year, the sun is coming out and it's heating up, and the thermostat is going to contain a thermometer, and the thermometer is the receptor, and it's going to detect that the temperature is rising. Okay, and so it's going higher than the set point, which is 70, and that information is going to the thermostat, which is the control center. Okay. The thermostat, when the thermostat receives that information, it sends information to the effector. In this case, it would send information to the air conditioner. The air conditioner would be the effector if the thermometer reads that the temperature rises. Okay, the heater would be the effector if the thermometer reads that the temperature drops too much. So what happens is the response is opposite. So we say that the response opposes or negates the original stimulus. And that is why we call this type of